The question is, Lord Maitreya in his book, Master Keys to Spiritual Freedom, says that there are 4 stages of the Christ event, or the path to Christhood. The 4th stage is when you have to publicly declare yourself as the living Christ. Many spiritual disciples from life to life are afraid to do this because they are afraid of being attacked and ridiculed by the fallen beings, or even by people on earth. I was afraid too, but in the spring I overcame the original trauma of rejection and rescue. Can you tell me how you had or are going through this? Okay, so the book that's being referred to is this, Master Keys to Spiritual Freedom. And it was dictated through me by an ascended master called Maitreya, or Lord Maitreya. And he has an important position in the cosmic hierarchy. He's overseeing the initiations that people go through. And the book is about how people lost contact with their spiritual teachers and how to regain it. And he talks about there are 4 challenges of Christ. And the first one is to recognize Christ outside yourself. This can be you meet a person who has some degree of Christhood. Doesn't have to be full Christhood, but some degree of Christhood. But you can also come across a teaching that is an expression of Christhood, or you can come to understand what Christhood really is. And Christhood is a state of consciousness that is above and beyond or outside of duality, the duality consciousness. I've talked about that in several of my videos, especially about the ones about non-duality. I talk about what the duality consciousness is. And all human beings, even if they are trapped in duality, they have the ability to recognize that there is something outside of duality. So that's the first challenge of Christ. And Peter actually passed that challenge by recognizing Jesus and deciding to follow him. Now, the second challenge of Christ is that you are continually striving for higher and higher experiences with the Christ mind. So you don't allow your ego and the separate selves to pull Christ into validating your dualistic beliefs. And this is a very subtle challenge, difficult challenge, and Peter failed it. That's why there is that passage in Matthew chapter 16 where Jesus tells Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Because Peter, even though he had recognized Jesus, he wanted Jesus to conform to Peter's expectations of what should or shouldn't happen to him. And so Jesus is very stern in rebuking him. And that's the second challenge of Christ. The third challenge of Christ is that you're not just following Christ as an outer person or an outer principle, but you are beginning to recognize that Christ is everywhere, because the purpose of the Christ mind, as I've explained in several videos, is actually that it secures oneness between the Creator and His creation. So you begin to recognize that not only is Christ outside of you, the Christ is inside of you. And therefore you have the potential to become the living Christ, to put on the Christ mind, to transcend duality. And as I've explained when I talk about 144 levels of consciousness, you have the potential to go beyond the 96th level and really begin to acquire that consciousness that is the Christ consciousness, or the consciousness of oneness, you can call it. And so then the fourth challenge of Christ is that you not only, you don't just sit in a cave in the Himalayas and experience the Christ consciousness, but you actually go out in the world and use the Christ consciousness you have attained, the level of Christ you have attained, to help other people. So that's expressing the Christ mind. Now, the question isn't entirely correct, because it says that you have to publicly declare yourself as the living Christ, and that's not the case. You have to express your Christhood publicly, but that's not the same as going out and say, "Hi, I'm Kim, I'm the living Christ." You know, you express that higher level of consciousness you reached. I mean, obviously, if you live in a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist culture, it's not constructive to go out and say, I'm the living Christ. But you can still express that higher level of consciousness so that other people have a chance to recognize it, and also so you can give that non-dualistic perspective on things. And it's quite correct. I mean, in a sense, the story of Jesus' life illustrates what happens to people who go to this fourth level and express their Christhood. You will be a threat, not only to the fallen beings, but to the general population, because when you come and express your Christhood, you are challenging them to change. You are essentially saying, now that you have experienced the living Christ, you can't stay the same. Or rather, you can, but only by denying Christ. See, right now, when people haven't encountered the Christ, they can be asleep. They don't know there's an alternative. But when they encounter a person who has embodied some level of Christ consciousness, they have experienced there's an alternative to their normal state of consciousness. So they can't remain asleep. They have to actively deny Christ, and that becomes a certain judgment of Christ upon the people who do this. And so this is the challenge at a certain level of the spiritual path. You can say that, if you want to be completely neutral, you can say the spiritual path is about gradually raising your consciousness beyond duality until you attain oneness with this one mind, which is also the Christ mind or the Buddha nature. And then you start expressing it. And so the question is, can you tell me how you had or are going through this? Yeah, well, it's a long story, so let me just try and summarize it in a way that can be helpful to others. First of all, I realized at a fairly early age or stage what I just said about Jesus' life, that he is an example for all of us to follow. So he's not the exception. So, in other words, I realized that I too, as I started to grow in awareness and express my Christhood, I would be exposed to this rejection and possibly persecution from other people. And so I had some time where I processed this and was dealing with it. And what I would say the first thing that really helped me deal with this is free will, coming to really understand free will. Because I recognized that I had always been very respectful of other people's free will, but I had not been equally respectful of my own free will. So in other words, I thought I shouldn't hurt anybody. But I also thought in order to avoid hurting other people, I shouldn't be too challenging or too direct. And that meant I wasn't actually respecting my own right to be who I am, basically to be the Christ and to express the level of consciousness I reached. I wasn't really respecting my own free will. And so when I realized that and spent some time processing this, I just came to a point where, and it was a complex process because, you know, when I was new to the spiritual path, I had what most spiritual people I know have. We are so enthusiastic about the spiritual path, we want to convert everybody to a spiritual teaching or spiritual outlook on life, perhaps even our specific teaching. And this is, of course, there's a certain force there. We almost want to force people to wake up because we think it's so good for them to wake up that it's okay to push them a little bit. And so I had to work on those separate selves, those subconscious selves, and get over this desire to push others. And this ties in with me being an avatar. As I explained in the avatar videos, we came here to help others, and so we can sometimes get too forceful in wanting to help others. And I also have some avatar videos where I talk about this with free will. So when I overcame these separate selves and wanted to push people, I realized that I don't have any desire to push people anymore. I don't even have a desire. I don't have a need to be validated by other people. Before that, I had certain subconscious selves that wanted to be validated by other people. So I wanted people to agree with me. So I was in this fixed, in this catch-22, where I had an obsessive-compulsive desire to talk to other people about spirituality, but I also had an obsessive-compulsive desire to be validated by them. And these were just subconscious selves that were projecting this at me. So, I talk to people sometimes too forcefully, and when I got rejected or ignored, I felt really bad about it. And so there is no solution to this other than coming to see that this comes from separate selves, and then just spend the time and the effort to let those selves die. And once the selves are dead, you don't have either compulsion. You don't have a compulsion to talk to people. You don't have this compulsive need to be validated. So I came to a point where I'm not trying to change other people's state of mind in order to change my own state of mind, because I had taken command over my own state of mind. So I came to a point where I simply realized that, but I have a right to be who I am. I have a right to have reached the level of consciousness I have reached as a result of following the spiritual path for so many years, making all the effort I made, including, resolving my psychology, first of all. And I have a right to express this. And what I simply need to do is give myself the freedom to be who I am, and give other people the freedom to react any way they want to me. And it's simply that you realize at this point, that we are all at a certain level of consciousness. I've talked about how there are 144 levels of consciousness possible on Earth. So I have walked the spiritual path for a long time. I reached a certain level of consciousness, doesn't really matter which one, but I'm, as many spiritual people are, I'm above the average person on Earth. Most spiritual people who have been sincere about following the path for some time, we have risen above the average person on Earth. And so all we can really do is express ourselves from that level of consciousness. But what we have to realize is that other people, when they encounter us, they will react to what we are expressing from their level of consciousness. In other words, we have to overcome this naive, youthful, enthusiastic expectation that other people are going to react to what we say the same way we do. Because they can't. Because what we are saying is set from our level of consciousness. And if they are at a lower level of consciousness, how could they possibly react the same way we do? It just can't be done, right? And so this is some realizations we can come to there. And then we can say, well, I don't have a particular intent or agenda when I'm approaching other people, other than expressing who I am. And if you can come to that point, then you don't really feel that they are rejecting you or persecuting you, because you don't take it personally. You realize that whatever they say about you, and they may be very nasty and very unpleasant, but it's just an expression of their level of consciousness. In other words, you don't have to take this personally, because in a sense it isn't personal, even though they're talking to you or talking about you. It's not personal. It's just their subconscious selves are spewing out whatever is in those subconscious selves. They can't help it. They can't do anything about it. It really doesn't have anything to do with you other than you triggered it. You triggered the reaction. Because they saw something in you that disturbed them, and they didn't want to be disturbed, so they, in order to, they are rejecting Christ in you. But they, of course, don't realize this consciously. But what happens is that the subconscious selves, or the ego, has to find a justification for rejecting Christ. And what is the best justification for rejecting someone? Is to tear them down. Make them seem like they are no good, they're wrong, they are of the devil. I don't know, if I had a dime for every fundamentalist Christian who's told me I'm of the devil, so they just, whatever is their level of consciousness, that's what they're going to express at you. And when you realize that and accept they can't do anything else, then you can just say, okay, I don't take this personally. It's like Jesus said, the prince of this world comes and has nothing in me. Whatever they say, it just passes right through you. And I was really helped when in 2009-10, there was a group of people that were really trying to destroy me psychologically, or even destroy my reputation on the internet. Because that was, I've talked about it before, it was like my crucifixion event. I was crucified by this because they could say whatever they wanted on the internet. They could even make things up, and they did. And so, but I had to come to a point where I saw that the reason why I was reacting to this was that I had certain subconscious selves. So, take care here. You can reach a fairly high level of consciousness. You can go above the 96th level of consciousness. But it's not that you are a perfect human being and you have no subconscious selves and no ego left. Anytime you react, it's the subconscious self that causes you to react. And if you also keep that in mind, then you can just say, hey, why am I reacting? Let me look at the self and get over it. And once you get over it, you don't react anymore. So it's like, what does it matter what people say about you if you don't have a reaction to it? You can just allow them to say whatever they want to say. And so that was pretty much the process I went through over some years. As I said, it started in a sense earlier, because even when I found the spiritual path when I was 18, I tried to talk to my own family about it. And they, of course, totally rejected it and thought I was completely naive and stupid, and I was being lured by people who just wanted my money. You know, and so from that moment on, I realized very clearly that not everybody is going to accept what I say about the spiritual path. And so I was dealing with it in a sense all along, and I think most spiritual people are. But it took a different turn in 2002 when I started working directly for the masters and started doing the websites. My first website was called AskWillJesus.com, and it contains a lot of teachings about what Jesus actually taught, including, you know, the mystical teachings of Christ and the teaching about the path, that he's an example and not the exception. And so from that moment on, I had to deal with that. Here you are standing out and declaring that you are working with an ascended master called Jesus of all, because he's the most difficult master in a way, because both spiritual people and Christians will reject it. So I had to deal with it there. But then, as I said, in 2009-10, it was really it was a more direct personal attack against me. So I had to deal with it at that level also. And then, you know, I've had other selves I've dealt with over the years, and it really didn't. A big turning point was in 2018, when I described this before also. I came to this point where I felt there's nothing I have to do on earth. And that helped me overcome this compulsion to do something. Because the compulsion to do something kind of put me in a catch-22 in the sense that I felt, but I'm here to help other people realize there's a spiritual side to life. So I have to be very careful that nothing I do or say, or nothing about me personally, causes them to reject the message. In other words, I shouldn't be scaring them away by how I am. And so, at the same time that I had the compulsion to approach people, I also had the fear that they could reject me personally and therefore reject the message, the spiritual path. And I only overcame this when I realized, as I described, that, you know, all I can do is be myself. And I also realized at some point, you know, because I saw this, you know, after Facebook came out, you got a, you know, it's almost like when you have a spiritual group or movement, you know, there's a certain selection that takes place. I mean, people who aren't interested in the spirituality, they don't really come across it. So you're only meeting spiritual people who are interested in the spiritual side of life. But when you are on Facebook, for example, and people can post, then you encounter a lot of people who are not particularly interested in spirituality. So you get all these comments, you know, just, you probably experienced it, all kinds of comments. And what I realized was a very simple fact. You cannot please everybody. And that goes for you and it goes for me. I realized it in me, of course. I can't please everybody. There are some people that will take one look at me and they don't like me. Whatever it is, you know, there's some kind of reaction in them. They don't like it. They don't like the way I talk, the way I express myself. What can I do about it? You know, If I try to change myself to accommodate one group of people, you can be absolutely sure there'll be another group of people who won't like that either. So no matter what you do, somebody's not going to like it. So instead of trying to adapt to all of these people, you can only do one thing: be yourself. And with being yourself, I mean, be yourself as you are at your present level of consciousness. Now you are still open to, you can grow towards higher level of consciousness, you can see these subconscious selves, get rid of them, but you also have to recognize, you have a certain personality, right? I happen to have a fairly pale skin, and there are a lot of people in the world who have darker skin than I do, and some of them don't like people with pale skin, and what can I do about that? Some people don't like blonde hair, blue eyes. Some don't like the shape of my nose. I mean, hallelujah. What am I supposed to do? You have this old fairy tale with Cinderella, who leaves the glass slipper at the ball. And then the king's messenger comes to the house, and her sisters are trying to get the glass slipper on. One cuts a toe and one cuts a heel. How much are you going to cut to change yourself to accommodate other people? But you see, that's not the point when you're talking about Christ, because Christ is not the outer personality or your looks or the way you talk. Christ is a state of consciousness that's beyond all of the outer forms. And when that is expressed through you, it touches people's hearts. And if they're willing, they can recognize that you have something they don't have and they want it. Or they can also recognize that you have achieved something that they haven't achieved and don't want to achieve, and therefore they go into this reaction and say they have to justify why they're rejecting the Christ in you. And what better way to do this than focus on something about your outer appearance that they don't like and use that as an excuse, right? And what can you do about it? Absolutely nothing, because the Christ is not here to convert those who are not ready. It's here really not to judge people beforehand. The Christ, in a sense, even though Jesus said, "For judgment I am come," but the Christ you don't consciously in your mind judge other people. I used to think, oh, is this person ready to hear something about the spiritual path? What can I tell that person without scaring them off? But now I'm saying, why should I try with my outer mind to evaluate whether people are ready? I just have to be myself, and I leave it up to them how they choose to react. And if they choose to reject Christ, that becomes their judgment. Not that I'm judging them. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me, right? It's like you come to a point where you are willing to help other people. You are willing to express something. I mean, since 2002, when I started these websites, my entire life has revolved around getting these teachings from the Ascended Masters, publishing over 80 books, and more material available for free on the websites. Right? So my whole life has revolved around reaching out with some material that can help other people. And in the beginning, I did it because, well, for a variety of reasons, but part of it was that I was hoping to get something for myself out of it, the sense that I was doing something that was worthwhile, that it was, as I say in my avatar videos, worthwhile to come to Earth, that I had made a positive difference. But over time, that just fades away, So you're not doing this to convert other people. And I've actually come to a point where I would say that, I'm not saying this is the ultimate point. Maybe there's other realizations I haven't come to, but at least what I have realized is that in respecting free will, I have no intentions for other people. When I talk to somebody, I'm just expressing whatever comes to me from my higher self, from one of the Ascended Masters. I'm just expressing what comes to me. And in order to be the open door, and that's really what the Christ is. If you want to clear, concise description of what the living Christ is. You are the open door between earth and the spiritual realm. And some being in the spiritual realm. It can be a higher self, it can be an ascended master. But you are the open door. And in order to be the open door, as I've said before, you have to be as neutral as possible. Open. Nothing filters it. You have no intentions. So when I approach somebody, I'm generally neutral, and I strive to be as neutral as possible. In other words, I don't even have the intention they should accept what I'm saying, because I leave that up to their free will choices. But on the other hand, I also leave it up to my free will choice that I'm choosing to be the open door, no matter how they respond. And if I sense that there's somebody I can't help, I just focus on somebody else. Like I realized in 2009-10, when these people were after me, I realized nothing I say would make a difference. Nothing I say would change their minds. So why would I try? Why would I use my attention and energy on trying to help these people that I knew I couldn't help? Why not focus my attention and energy on helping people that I can help? Or rather, that the Christ through me can help. And so, these are sort of, it's just some of the steps I've gone through. You could probably write a whole book about this, because it is very important for spiritual people. When you reach a certain level of the path, you have gone within, you have made contact with the Christ mind, you can accept that you have the Christ mind inside of you. But then the real challenge is to go out and express it. And really, until you do express it, it isn't fulfilled. The cycle isn't fulfilled, because I remember, especially in my first spiritual movement, the meditation movement, there were a lot of people that looked at meditation as a way to achieve this cosmic consciousness. And they thought that the way to do this was to withdraw from the world, take all these expensive meditation courses in Switzerland, and then they would come to a point where they would just sit there and meditate and be in bliss all day. And you even had the concept in my first meditation movement that the person who started it, the Maharishi, he spent 12 years in a cave in the Himalayas before he was ready to go out and teach meditation. So they saw this as an ideal, And there was even talk, and there's even talk in Yogananda's book, that there are some advanced yogis that are spending even hundreds of years in a cave in the Himalayas, meditating, holding a spiritual balance for us. And many spiritual people dreamt about doing this. You're sitting there in a cave, nothing disturbing you. But that's not the Christ. The Christ is an outgoing action. First, you go within in order to connect to the Christ mind, but then in order to complete it, to have the omega aspect of it, you go out and express it in helping other people, or at least presenting other people with the challenge of Christ to accept or reject Christ. And until you could say that people can find a website or a book or spiritual teaching, and it can give them some feel for what Christ is. But really, until they meet somebody who has attained a certain level of Christhood, they haven't really been given the challenge of Christ. Because what is it you do when you are expressing your Christhood? You are demonstrating to these people that here's a person who is just like them, who started out just like them, but has attained a higher level of consciousness. You see, this is the curse of Christianity. The fatal flaw in Christianity is that they elevated the fallen beings when they took over Christianity. They elevated Jesus to be the exception rather than the example. And so Jesus is so special. A star appeared over Bethlehem when he was born. 3 wise men came. And all of this circus, spiritual glitter, as one person called it. So obviously Jesus is so special, and what the fallen beings want us to believe is he's the only one who could be the living Christ. But we all have that potential. And so the real fulfillment of Jesus' mission is that many, many people dare to express their Christhood, so that people can meet somebody that was just like them, grew up in a normal life and lived a normal life, but has attained a higher state of consciousness. That's when they can have this challenge to see, oh, it wasn't just Jesus who could do this, I could do it too. Because what one has done, all can do. And that's the real challenge, and I think, many spiritual people have already done this or have started doing this, and many more have the potential. Jesus actually says on the Ask Real Jesus website that there are 10,000 people in embodiment right now who have the potential to manifest full Christhood in this lifetime. Reach the higher levels towards the 144th level of consciousness. But there are millions more who have the potential to manifest a high degree of Christhood, meaning going beyond the 96th level, if they apply themselves to the spiritual path. And this doesn't mean that they all have to be Christians or recognize me as a messenger or the websites or the books that I stand for. It just means they have to find what is it in their individual life plans that they decided was their personal expression of Christhood. What was the gift that they are here to bring in this lifetime? And then, of course, you have to say, okay, if this is important for me, and if I recognize consciously that this is important for me, what do I have to do to get to the point where I can be the open door? It's not that I am giving the gift, but the Christ mind through me is giving the gift. And how do I become the open door? And that is, of course, in a sense, what all of my videos are about, talking about this. How you can get to that point where you are the open door for your higher self, for the ascended masters, and you're neutral. You are the open door, not the filter. Because remember the second challenge of Christ? It is that you recognize there's a higher level, but your ego talks you into using that experience of something higher to validate your outer viewpoints. That's not being the open door. Then you are not presenting people with the challenge of Christ. You are presenting people with the, will they validate your ego rather than recognize the Christ in you? So I know a lot more could be said, but I think this is at least a starting point that I hope helps some people.